Yvette Cooper, of course, the Home Secretary, she has been talking tough about her plans to tackle essentially border security, illegal migration and so on and so forth. She reckons she can deport over 14,000 illegal immigrants over the next 6 months. Cool, blimey, that would be apparently the fastest deportation, if it happens, since 2018. That was when Theresa May was the Prime Minister. She's been coming up with lots of different ideas, Matt Goodwin. Increased detention centre spaces, increased staff, more coordination and cooperation with things like Europol and so on and so forth. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, it sounds good, doesn't it? Because ultimately the British people both want and deserve control. But let's play the numbers game for a minute. Yvette Cooper's saying she's going to get 14,000 people outside the country. Well, it sounds good, except 19,000 have arrived so far this year. 131,000 have arrived since 2018, and Labour's going to basically give amnesty, I would estimate, to somewhere around 50 to 60,000 people who have already entered the country illegally. So Labour's plan on illegal migration isn't going to work because they've removed the Rwanda plan, they've amended the Illegal Migration Act, which basically is removed a deterrent that would otherwise have stopped people from coming over. So the small boats are going to keep on coming, the numbers are going to keep going up. And what Yvette Cooper's basically doing is, like, imagine you're in a bath and you've got this mug and you're scooping up some water and you're throwing it out, but both the taps are on and they're going full steam and the bath is being filled with water constantly. That's basically what's happening in this country with the illegal migration crisis. This isn't going to work.
Get off that fence. I think what I'm taking there is you've got no faith in those plans whatsoever. Zoe, are you any more optimistic?
Not particularly, no. I think it's going to be incredibly hard to get a grip on illegal migration unless you open safe and legal routes. The only way you're going to stop people from making those dangerous journeys and being smuggled over the border, over the English Channel, is if you actually give proper regulated ways for people to come across and claim asylum.
From which countries?
From whichever country they need to claim asylum from. You can have systems in place. We have done in the past. We've got one for Ukrainian refugees at the minute. Otherwise, what you have is an incentive for people smugglers to create these criminal rings where they take money off people and they put them in these dinghies that are overpopulated, and then they end up dying in the Channel. And then they arrive on our shores and we don't have anywhere to put them. It doesn't work. The only way you can stop this at the source is by making sure there is a proper functioning asylum system, which currently I would argue we don't have.
But
Go on, in you come.
I have some questions, just a couple of questions. I know that you're supposed to ask questions.
I've got loads of questions, but I'm happy to relax. You go.
Nobody on the left, nobody in the Labour Party can tell me, OK, safe and legal routes. So how many people? What's the limit? How many people are we going to allow through safe and legal routes? And if I'm a people smuggler and I hear, well, the UK's got safe and legal routes, why would I then suddenly close up shop, stop my business and say, well, they've got safe and legal routes now. I guess now I'm not going to make 50,000 or 100,000 or 200,000 by smuggling these guys in, because all I need is a dinghy and some lifeboats. Why would I stop my business? I would just keep going.
If you are an asylum seeker, if you're someone who wants to claim refuge in another country, will you apply for an asylum visa, or would you go to a country and claim asylum, or would you put your life and your family's life at risk and get in a dinghy? Quite clearly, people only do that when they are so desperate and they feel like they've got no other means to get to the UK. I would argue, I do think you're right. I don't think it would totally cut it off at the source. There's still going to be people who want to make that journey and get into the country, possibly without being, without being known to the authorities. But I would argue that definitely the majority of people want to make that journey in a safe and regulated way, and that's why you would definitely lessen the demand for people smugglers. In terms of numbers, I don't know. I'm not an expert on migration. I don't know how many people are going to need to claim asylum over the next few years. But working with the EU and France, which is another thing that Labour set out to do, is the right way forward, because only through international cooperation can you actually deal with the migration crisis.
The only way, Michelle, you can solve this crisis, if we're being really brutally honest with the British people about this, because I seem to be one of the only people like you who's brutally honest about this issue, is we need to leave the European Convention on Human Rights. So also, by the way, we can deport foreign nationals who are committing crimes in this country. We've got 12,000 in our prisons. We'll get onto that in a minute. We need to leave the ECHR. We need to reform the Human Rights Act, and we need an active deterrent like the Rwanda plan, but let's maybe call it something else. Now, if we have all of those things in place, we have a chance at saving ourselves £5 billion, which is what we're spending every year on our broken asylum system. £5 billion that could be spent on, I don't know, those northern communities that were rioting 2 weeks ago because they feel like they've been completely
those people won't
shafted by the
stop trying to make those journeys. People are fleeing war-torn areas. They might have families in the UK. They might speak English. There are plenty of reasons why people are still going to be desperate to come to the UK. The best way you can solve this, it's not going to stop just because you have something like the Rwanda plan in place. That's not going to work. If you leave the ECHR, that opens up all sorts of difficulties over our international obligations. We'll make ourselves an international pariah. We don't want that. The only way you're going to deal with this crisis that involves all the countries in the world is to work together. What you want to do is remove us from all of those relationships. That's not going to work. Where's it going to work?
No, I do. I want to put the British people before everybody else. That's my starting point.
So the best way to do that is to work with other countries. That's the only way you're going to...
That sounds very abstract and vague to me. There is a very clear plan.
But you can't shut off the borders and stop people from making that journey.
I never actually thought I would say this, but I will. I actually agree with Dominic Cummings on this, actually. I think Cummings has put forward a very good plan for how we would... strengthen and fix the borders. As we saw with the rioting and the protests...
What's his plan? Because people might not know what that is.
Leave the ECHR, reform the Human Rights Act, and I think it's fair to say have an active deterrent alongside those two things. Because if we don't, Michelle, what we've seen recently, the immigration protests, which is exactly what they were, by the way, not just, you know, far-right thuggery or whatever the Labour Party wants to call them, they're going to grow and grow and grow. We have to regain control of our borders because if we don't, the British people are going to get more and more frustrated and fed up with the state of politics on both the left and the right.
Can I ask you a question on this safe and legal route? Because I hear this all the time. If you had safe and legal routes... But then, I mean, surely, if you've got an island with finite space, then it's not logical nor practical to offer every single country in the land, because which country now has not got some form of turmoil within it? I mean, you can probably count those countries on a small piece of paper. So you can't just indefinitely offer safe and legal routes to all countries in the land. But, for example, we've got a safe and legal route in Afghanistan. But when you look at the country of origin, apparently, of these people crossing on these boats, a large number of these people are coming from Afghanistan. So there is a safe and legal route there, and they're not using it. Why?
Well, I'm not quite sure about the ins and outs of the Afghanistan, but my understanding was for only Afghanis who'd worked with the British government.
Well, there's criteria attached, of course, because you can't just... You wouldn't... I mean, maybe you would suggest a safe and legal route that's boundless, no criteria. You wouldn't suggest that, would you?
This is why... No, and as I was saying before, this is why this cannot be done in isolation. You have to work with other countries. And what I would suggest, like when we were in the EU, is you have a quota or you have a set number or you have agreements as to what your kind of criteria would look like, and you work with other countries. So, say if you have... You know, the reason the small boats crisis has really taken off since we left the EU is because we can no longer send people back to the first country they arrived in when they joined the European Union. Now, people smugglers know if they put them on the boat and they come here, they can't be removed from the UK.
So why is the illegal migration crisis just as bad in many other EU member states? Why is Italy, France and others all dealing with the same issue if the EU has the answer to this problem?
Because we know that there is turmoil across the world. We know there is conflict. We know there is resource scarcity. We know there is increasing climate issues, increasing environmental issues. There is going to be mass migration. We need to figure out how we deal with that. And I think the way we best deal with that... And, you know, James cleverly said this. He went to the USA, he went to Washington and he spoke about it with diplomats there. He said the only way we're going to deal with this is if we work together. People aren't going to stop trying to flee danger.
Yeah, but for me personally, pointing to the Conservative Party as having the answer to this riddle,
no, but my point is that people on the right and the left tend to agree with this.
We need to think completely outside the box.
Well, I'll play James cleverly in a second.
We need to build Fortress Britain, basically. We need to start putting the British people in front of international
I think that's naive.
Courts and foreign
courts.
I think
that is naive.
Listen, when people are rioting and protesting and smashing up their communities because they're so frustrated with not having what politicians promised them, which was control. I mean, this is the thing, Zoe. This is what people were promised. Lower migration, control of the borders. They were given the opposite of that. No wonder they're frustrated and fed up. I'm sorry, but, you know, Westminster needs to look at itself. It's utterly ridiculous.
I don't think you can justify the behaviour that we saw over the last few weeks. But you're saying that people didn't get what they asked for and therefore they went out into...
They were lied to by both left and right. They were lied to.
But now they have a new government that is clearly trying to implement various measures to bring down immigration. I don't think the things you're speaking about will work either.
If Yvette Cooper, if I could have one conversation with Yvette Cooper, here's what I would say. Apart from don't do interviews with your husband on mainstream television, I would say Start to be real with the British people, because we know 14,000 removals is not going to come close to the problem facing this country. Start being honest with the British people about the scale of this problem. Say you're about to give amnesty to 50 to 60,000 people in the country. Say we have no serious deterrent. Say that 14,000 isn't even scratching the surface. Just be honest with people, because I've watched this for 20 years. Politician after politician lying and misleading on the Conservative Party and in the Labour Party. Somebody in this country has to be real with the British people about immigration. They have to be honest. And they have to say, look, this is what it's going to take to solve this issue. Because if they don't, we're going to have more of the protests, we're going to have more of the riots.
But don't you also agree that, in many ways, immigration, we need immigration? I mean, we've seen how we need it in our health service.
We
we've
don't
seen
need
how
this
it
level of immigration, though.
Well, you can talk about the various, you know, you can talk about the numbers, and you can have debates over that, and you can have debates over, you know, how it's going to impact various industries. But overall, immigration has been a net plus to the UK. We can see that.
You know what? There was a poll last weekend, and they asked the British people, do you think, this was Opinion, which I think is fair to say, you know, a credible pollster, they asked people, do you think immigration has been good for the national economy? More people said it's not been good than it's been good. And they asked the same question about our cultural life and public services. What we have in this country now is a policy of mass immigration. It's an extreme policy of mass immigration because it doesn't reflect the interests of British people, that is building us a low-wage, low-skill economy that is dependent on cheap migrant workers to keep big business happy, to also, by the way, keep Liberals in London happy because they love this feeling of moral righteousness that comes with saying, I like immigration, I want more of it. Well, guess what? They're not going to face the costs of mass immigration. It's going to be the working class. It's going to be people outside of London and university towns. It's going to be people in those towns that were rioting and protesting the last couple of weeks because not only have they had mass immigration and their economies hollowed out, but they were then given the grooming scandal on top of that, and they were told that actually they were racist if they raised any questions about it. And I think that's bang out of order. I think people need to be treated with respect in this country by their political leaders.
I think the part of the problem we have is that we have... I mean, it's not true that we haven't been speaking about immigration. We've been speaking about immigration in almost every general election we've had over the last 20 years. There has been several occurrences where immigration has actually led...
Yeah, but they've lied, though, Zoe. They've been talking about it. They've all promised it. They've put it in their manifestos. They've applied numbers to it, tens of thousands. But they lied. They didn't deliver it.
OK, but what we have here is we have... You know, you say a low-wage, a low-skilled economy dependent on cheap labour, but we have needed immigration for various things in this country. I mean, we've needed it in our healthcare sector, we've needed it in our hospitality sector. We have seen the damage that has been done to those sectors, tightening certain parts of the immigration
but you're
system
describing
without...
controlled, skilled-based immigration,
But so is Matt.
And I think one of the challenges that Yvette Cooper is trying to... I've got to say, I don't believe this plan is going to work either. One of the things she would argue, it's all about... you know, the crossings, and then also one of the things she was talking tough on anyway, is about businesses that are employing people illegally in the dark economy that they shouldn't be. Apparently she's going to clamp down on that as well.
Do you know, here's a remarkable thing about Britain.
Is it a quick thing about
I bet
Britain?
nobody knew this. It's not a criminal offence to hire illegal migrants. Do you know that? It's not a criminal offence.
Are you sure?
Yep, that's one thing we could do right now. You can be fined for doing it, but it is not technically a criminal offence currently. I mean, we're just a soft touch, right? I mean, the whole system is completely ridiculous.